Biodiversity Conference, COP16.
Excellent. So I did send through a couple of slides. I don't know if those came through to Helen or if I should try and share them now. Let me try and do that.
Try and share them now, Melissa. That'd be great because I don't seem to have them. Maybe.
Right. Okay, I did email them. Right, let's see if I can get that to work.
Whilst we're just doing this, if I can remind somebody that the general convention, if you're not speaking, can you put your speaker onto mute so you don't get feedback? I've got a large number of people attending this morning, so there's a possibility to say we're getting feedback if we're not muted. Thanks, Melissa.
I don't know if I'm managing to share. No, I'm not managing to share at the moment. I've got a background slide. Wait a minute. Wait a second. I mean, I can do this without if it's easier.
We're seeing your background slide, so obviously that there's a connection made.
Yeah, that's good. Sorry, just give me a second. Sorry, I will get there. Sorry, just give me a second.
If it helps, there you go.
Okay. Do you have that now?
Yep.
You just need to make it full screen.
Okay, I can do. I just also now just need to find my notes. Sorry, I now feel I've been inefficient for you all, but we will.
Don't worry.
We will do that. How do I do this? I can get this going. No, I'm sorry, I'm going to bin the slides because I actually need some notes up. So I'm just going to talk without slides. So I will stop the sharing. I will stop the sharing. They were mostly just pictures. So, well, very lovely to meet you all. I haven't been at this forum before. I'm the director of the Cambridge Conservation Initiative. I've been in this role for 6 months, and one of the most exciting activities that I was engaged in over the last while was to represent CCI at COP16, the Biodiversity Conference of the Parties in Cali. And as I think all of you probably know, CCI is an interesting setup. It's a collaboration between 10 of the world's leading biodiversity organizations, including major global players like UNEP WCNC and the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and also a number of NGOs. And then 6 schools across the university, so involving many researchers. So at COP16, many partners were present, as it were, doing their own thing, running side events, supporting countries in creation. And my role, along with CCI colleagues, was to try and help build synergies between what people were doing, and to amplify some of the messages, and then to feed back to CCI partners so we could plot future influence around nature on the global stage. So this Conference of the Parties for Biodiversity came at a very important time, a time when, as we know, we've got a major nature crisis globally. One of the pieces of breaking news at the COP is that 1/3 of tree species are now at risk of extinction, as well as 65 billion of agricultural subsidies now working against nature, and a variety of other pieces of kind of quite disastrous news, really, for the state of nature in the world, and of course interlinked with the climate crisis. But it was also a conference that felt like a time of optimism, because it followed on 2 years from COP15 in Kunming and Montreal, where the world agreed and committed to a global biodiversity framework with 23 targets that all countries signed up to, apart from the US and a couple of others, but most countries signed up to, which set out really a very important sort of roadmap for the world to protect and conserve and restore and repair biodiversity and contribute towards a thriving future for all life on Earth. And this COP wasn't about negotiation in that sense. It felt much more about implementation. And it was supposed to be a COP about supporting countries to update their national biodiversity strategies and action plans, bring those forward, and to secure some of the financing that was necessary to implement them. And in many ways, as I'll say, the formal negotiations were quite disappointing. But in parallel, we had a much more hopeful and lively set of informal activities. And all of this took place in a country which is in Colombia, which is, of course, extremely rich for biodiversity, one of the most nature-rich countries in the world, and with some extremely inspiring leadership from the Convention on Biodiversity President and Colombian Minister of the Environment, Susana Mohammed. So I'm going to say something first about the formal and then about the informal, because they really almost, it was as if there were two COPs with very different things going on. So the formal COP happened in its negotiating chambers. Contact groups met during the first week, and then in the second week, what's called the high-level segment happened, with ministers and heads of state flying in from around the world to join their country delegations in the final stages of discussion. And as I said, these were mainly about countries sharing their updated NBSATs, as they were called, a horrible acronym which really stands for National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plans, with a lot of the debate focused on what would be the mechanisms, what would be the indicators, what kind of data did countries need to ensure implementation in a robust science-led way. And only a small number, about 20% of countries, had made their updates before the COP, and others are now needing to continue to do so afterwards. But there were also several cross-cutting and quite contentious issues which were dominating the negotiations. So probably the biggest one was financing. There's a massive gap in resources to deliver on the global biodiversity framework, a lot of discussion about how to fill it, and great tension around that. Most starkly, I think, between countries in the global south who hold so much of the world's valuable species and habitats and really badly need resources for conservation and restoration. And then global north countries who you could argue have the money, but whose willingness to contribute it to global biodiversity funds is often quite tightly constrained by the fiscal deficits and the cost of living crises that many European countries are facing at home. So amidst this kind of standoff around public finance, a host of private sector funding mechanisms came to be on the table, with businesses offering contributions, philanthropic contributions. A big deal was agreed on oceans, with a number of foundations and philanthropists contributing. Yet with, particularly around the land-based areas, a lot of questions about how far they'll actually materialise, and also the feasibility and implications of some of these more novel mechanisms, such as biodiversity credits. And I think, while some are very gung-ho about these new ideas around offsetting and the, as it were, selling nature to save it, others are questioning whether these will be properly governed and whether they might actually lead to a generation of green grabs, which actually kind of appropriate and commoditize biodiversity and nature at the expense of local rights, including those of Indigenous people. So there were some activist protests outside the negotiating chambers around finance. A second area of contention concerns the use of genetic data from nature, and so-called digital sequence information, often called DSI, came to be a real point of discussion. It's used really heavily by the makers of drugs, pharmaceutical products, agricultural products, who mostly access it free from public databases, often those made available from universities. And at the last COP, COP15, nations agreed to establish a multilateral fund for benefit sharing from its use, so that the countries and the places and the people from whom this genetic information is derived, the kind of information that comes from forests perhaps, or local biodiversity, could actually benefit from its use. But the details of how companies and other entities are going to pay into a fund and how the money will be distributed became a real point of contention at the COP. There was a Kali fund that was established, but there were also pharmaceutical and agribusiness companies who lobbied against those proposals, and especially against some of the other proposals, such as that a 1% levy on profits should go into that fund. So I think this still remains somewhat unsettled. A third area of debate turned on the Global Biodiversity Framework's area-based targets, which are very ambitious. This was the idea that by 2030, globally, 30% of land and seascapes would be protected for nature. And then there's another target, about 30% of areas being restored. And there's a target 2 and target 3. Yet they need to be implemented nationally. They'll affect billions of people who either live in those areas that are up for protection or live on the edges of them. There was a lot of debate on fine-tuning the criteria and the measures for land set aside for rewilding, and on the governance and social implications of those. And again, questions of justice, questions of equity, questions of governance are key. And these will now land in what countries are planning to do and how they bring them into their national strategies. And finally, with this focus on local communities and rights, there were also some very important negotiations on proposals to strengthen what's called Article 8J. And this is the principal mechanism for the participation of local communities and Indigenous groups into the Convention on Biodiversity. And to date, it's been an ad hoc working group, but at this COP, there was a proposal to create a formal subsidiary body, which would have the chance to debate and actually bring forward formal proposals. And this seemed like a no-brainer, honestly, but the negotiations became very tense, particularly around struggles over group identities, especially how to recognise Colombian populations who identify as Afro-descendants, which was a new category into these groups. Unfortunately, that I mean, it was a bit protracted, but by the end of the COP, there was an agreement. So that was probably one of the only formal negotiating points that was agreed. The others, by the end of that high-level segment around financing and national positions in DSI, remained not agreed. So the formal conference actually agreed to reconvene. And there's now a follow-on meeting that's been set to happen in Rome in February, where they will hope to finally seal the deal on these other areas. So in a way, I think many delegates left really frustrated from Cali, thinking, where have we actually got to? Not very far. So a disappointment in the formal arenas, but informally, things were much more hopeful, and yet it often felt like two different COPs. So while one had these negotiating chambers kind of up the stairs and off to the side, they were quite invisible, and yet there were 26,000 people in what is actually the largest COP that there's ever been, participating in a mass of side events, meeting and networking, right across a sprawling blue zone, and again in the town of Cali, a green zone which had a kind of festival atmosphere and involved many citizens from across Colombia and across the region. And unusually, normally at COPs, these kind of side events run in the breaks and in the evenings so that ministers can actually take part in them. This time they didn't, they ran in parallel. So mostly the high-level delegates were trapped away in their negotiations and everybody else was in these side events. There was a real sense of parallel worlds. And there was an unprecedented mix as well. Oh, very good, okay. And so these are just some pictures. Where on the one hand, there was a really high level of business and private sector involvement, around 3,000 delegates, which is many, many more than there's ever been before. And yet also many local community and NGO participants in what Colombia described as a people's COP, and promoted a big theme around nature and culture and peace with nature. And sometimes these different worlds, again, they were often in different side events. They were talking in very different terms, almost different languages, and often didn't speak to each other, and yet both were, I think, very important. Just a brief note that actually Cambridge and its networks were really present and active, from the work of CCI partner organisations and NGOs to contributions from the university, the Cambridge Institution for Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, and others from the university. And we did help to convene some events, just picking up on the chat, where people did come together. One was a large and lively event we coordinated called Just Transformations for Nature and People, making knowledge, evidence and action to scale, which did talk about how private sector finance and local questions of equity might be brought together. And we also helped with others to convene some cross-cutting discussions around 5 different themes that we picked out. One was around linking evidence and action. Another was around closing the funding gap and making sure that that private sector finance was delivered in a way that was equitable and supportive to local action. Third was around justice and inclusion for local communities. And a fourth was around inspiring action through stories of hope and resilience. And at the bottom of this set of photographs here, you can see Martin Harper from BirdLife, who convened a wonderful event around stories of transformative change and hope. And that did have contributions from both the NGO world and the business world. And then on the bottom right, you see a group of 32 alumni from the Conservation Leadership MPhil that we run here at CCI, who are now a fantastic group of professionals and leaders from all countries around the world. And they too were making these connections. Some of them are now working for the private sector, others for governments and others for NGOs. And they were part of bringing some of those dialogues together. So if I could have my other slide, I just wanted finally to, if you could just move on one more. Whoever's now doing this kind sharing. Second slide. I don't know. Okay. Well, my other slide, if we get there, is called the Rio Trio and the Boat to Belen. And what was also very clear at this COP, there was a focus on biodiversity, but it happened just before, there we go, COP29 for climate change held in Azerbaijan, in Baku. And then more recently, just over the last week or two, the desertification COP in Saudi Arabia, which really looks at land degradation and change. And in many ways, these ought to be brought together. Some of the most important discussion at COP16 was about the effects of climate change on biodiversity loss and some of those problems of tree extinction and so on, and habitat loss, and now a result of climate impacts. There was also some really important discussion about the synergies between protecting and restoring nature and mitigating against climate change, whether it's around the conservation and restoration of forests, natural grasslands and soils and marine habitats in stemming greenhouse gas emissions and capturing carbon, so-called nature-based solutions, or whether, or all around how nature and its restoration is a source of resilience in the face of climate impacts, in the face of heat and flooding and so on. So many were arguing that these national biodiversity strategies and action plans and the nationally determined contributions to climate change mitigation, the so-called NCDs, really need to be integrated. They really need to come together. And this, I think, will be a big focus in the road now to COP30 in Belém in Brazil, which will be held next November. And it's a climate conference, but being in the Amazon with the convening from Brazil, with its wealth of forests and biodiversity, nature is going to be at the fore. And we're starting to think in Cambridge around how we can come together to shape a series of activities and influencing activities that make sure that nature is really at the heart of the lead up to and the planning for and the decisions that we hope will be taken at COP30 to build on the synergies between biodiversity and climate rather than keeping these worlds apart. And again, some of the themes I think are here. There's going to be a lot of discussion of finance, of equity and rights, and of what kinds of evidence and data can help. And we'll be organising some activities at the David Attenborough building over the next year, at which it would be great to have others from the Cambridgeshire area attending and contributing and participating. Thank you.
Melissa, thank you so much for that. It's fascinating. We all of us, no doubt, followed the Baku COP, but also to some extent from a distance. It's always fascinating to have the insider's view of what was going on and to have the additional understanding. Sue's made a couple of points in the chat, which I think you addressed one of them already. But if we have any further questions from people for Melissa, please just let me know or hold your hand up. Herbert, I can see Herbert with his hand up. Herbert, over to you.
Yeah, can I say I found that a very interesting and careful presentation. But can I say it differed so much from a meeting I went to just about a week ago that was attended by, or where the presentation was by 6 people. It was attended by about 100 on COP, and they'd all been to COP. Maybe you know them, Hugh Hunt and Sean Fitzgerald, who were the director and associate director of the Cambridge Climate Repair Institute. And then there was a lawyer and a number of other specialists. And they had nothing but negative things to say about COP. They thought it was totally useless. And in some sense, the extreme or the summary of it was the last speaker put up a slide that had 13 matters that it had been sent to all the COP attendees, I was told, to consider during COP. And she asked us, first of all, to look through the 13 and see if they were sensible. And they all were. And then she said, I'd like to have a little indication. Put up your hand if you think all 13 were talked about. 6 were talked about, 4 were talked about, and then said 0. Now, I was sitting in the front, so I don't know how many voted 0, but I definitely voted 0, just for fun. And she said, that's absolutely right. Not one of these that was promised was talked about.
And this was the biodiversity COP, not the climate COP.
This was the recent Azerbaijan, and the meeting was held a week after these people who'd all been at the COP came back and talked about it.
Okay, so just okay, that's yeah, I mean that's very much what I've heard. But this was but I think you're referring to the climate change COP in Azerbaijan.
Yeah, the recent one.
Yeah, okay. So I was talking about the previous one, the biodiversity COP in Colombia.
I came in late because it took me.
Yeah. So that's what I was asked to talk, that's what I was asked to talk about. I mean, we also had colleagues from the Cambridge Conservation Initiative in Baku, in Azerbaijan, who came back with exactly the same view and found it very, very depressing.
Yeah.
Also because I think being held in a fossil fuel state, people, I mean, the whole feel of it was kind of depressing. People got off the plane, they said you could smell the petrol fumes. And it was a very different atmosphere, and I think there was little hope to be found. I mean, there were some financial contributions, and I know the UK and David Lammy, our Foreign Secretary, made a £3 billion early on commitment to nature-focused climate contributions. So there are some nuggets of hope, but I think the general feeling was depressing. I think the biodiversity COP was also depressing in terms of formal outcomes, but it did have this atmosphere of hope, which I think comes from the informal. And I find that quite interesting, because you think, where is actually the energy to drive forward change? And I think much of it is happening at the grassroots. It's coming from social movements, from citizen activism, from sometimes what cities are doing, what localities are doing, what states are doing in the US. So there's a country that hasn't signed up at all to the biodiversity agreement, and yet you've got a lot of interesting state level action around landscapes and nature. So it is actually two worlds, and I think raises really big questions about where the driving force for the changes that the world needs are going to come from, and what is really the value of these big conferences where countries get together and, yes, just to pick up on a point in the chat, expend a lot of fuel, a lot of carbon on getting there and getting together.
Well, could I?
I mean, I think, if I may, Melissa, we're going to have to move on reasonably quickly, but I do think it's fascinating, this connection between the formal and the informal, and how we build links in those two things and link the two together to amplify the informal to the extent that it results in more formal and broader action in biodiversity.
Exactly.
So food for thought, I think. But I'm afraid I've got to be the bad guy this morning and move us on to keep on schedule. I'm so grateful for you giving us that perspective. So I think we're up next is Rob from Cambridge, moving a bit closer to home, only slightly, because I mean it's still related, is Cambridgeshire Chalk Streams. Rob, are you on the call? Rob Martyr. I think we previously have had Rob saying he was available.
Could I just say, Melissa, could I have a contact with you? Could you send me an email, or could somehow we talk later?
Absolutely. I mean, I think I was on the email. I think I was on the email list for this group, which I'm unfamiliar with. So perhaps Peter could share it, or I can be just found as CCI Executive Director. So if you look on the CCI website, you'll find me, and I'd be delighted to be in touch.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks. Well,
Absolutely.
great to have brought you two together this morning. And I do see Rob is now ready to go. So Rob, over to you.
Great. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Perfect. Thank you.
Great stuff. Okay, thank you. Let's just go to... Right. Okay, so good morning, everybody. My name is Rob Martyr, and I've been contracted to work for Cambridge City Council on the Greater Cambridge Chalk Stream project. And today I'm just going to give you a very quick overview of where the project's heading in terms of direction, and just outline what we're hoping to achieve. Hold on, sorry, bear with me. We've got technical issues. Right. Okay. Right, sorry, just bear with me. I'm used to Microsoft Teams. Dear. Sorry, everybody. Okay. Right. Dear, sorry. Yeah, sorry, for some reason my screen, oh, here we go, sorry, we're working now. Okay, so apologies about the delay. So a quick introduction. So the key threats to chalk streams in Cambridgeshire, it's very much multivariant. So pollution from agricultural runoff and urban waste, sedimentation, impacts critical habitats such as spawning areas. Over abstraction is going to be a major issue. Well, it is a major issue in Cambridgeshire and will be in the future with things like development and climate change. Sewage pollution is an issue in terms of eutrophication. Climate change is going to be an increasing factor, and habitat fragmentation which is already a big threat to biodiversity. So using a selection of case study sites, the Greater Cambridge Chalk Stream Project aims to collect data to further investigate restoring and sustaining chalk streams, really to find solutions to mitigate issues such as impacts of pollution, over abstraction, potential solutions needed for climate change, with a focus on enhancing biodiversity and ecosystem resilience. Why have we chosen a case study approach? Well, we've looked at multiple river restoration projects throughout Cambridgeshire, and what we've realised with a lot of the in-channel works is there's some knowledge gaps in terms of evidence to highlight whether restoration is successful. So what we basically feel we need more evidence. So the project's going to collaboratively collect robust data on water quality, biological systems, geological factors, and we're hoping that by producing some detailed evidence, this can be shared collectively for long-term restoration and solutions. And we really feel that data collection will help identify some area-specific solutions to guide future restoration. And the hope is that this will also instigate and inspire scalable solutions. Some of the issues facing chalk streams, I guess, are limitations of things like the Water Framework Directive, which is allowing for nitrate levels, for example, of 5 to 6 milligrams a litre, phosphate levels of 0.1 milligrams a litre. And when we correlate this to the water quality parameters required by chalk stream flora and fauna, it's below, the chalk stream flora and fauna is well below the water quality parameters required. And so the real focus as well is to provide evidence to really lobby and state that chalk streams really do need much more protection in terms of water quality. And if we don't address these issues of water quality, then we're looking at quite serious issues of biodiversity shift, where our chalk stream flora and fauna communities will become more nutrient tolerant species, and it will increase our habitat degradation. And the Greater Cambridge Chalk Stream Project was very much in response to the declaration of a biodiversity emergency in Cambridge, and therefore we're looking at significant biodiversity loss of chalk stream species. So we have a quick look at some of the nutrient pollution issues. I just have to state that we've been testing various equipment for a 12-month to 24-month weekly water quality and biological monitoring program, and we've been testing equipment, and with the help of Dr. Mike Foley from Cam Valley Forum and Dr. Steve Boreham, and some of their initial testing results using the equipment we're hoping to use for water quality monitoring, just evidences. And I know the continued water quality monitoring by Hobson's Conduit Trust and Cam Valley Forum for some years now has evidenced that our water quality in terms of nutrients, in terms of sedimentation, in terms of ammonia, have regularly evidenced data that we're above our chalk stream threshold. So water quality, although there's multiple other issues, attenuation, trying to increase the flow, water quality is a major issue as well. So just very quickly, I know we're pushed for time. It's just to emphasize the importance of water quality for our chalk stream species. So if we look at things like our water crowfoots and look at the nitrate and phosphate levels, you can see that the water quality levels that we're getting from our water quality testing are again above the threshold. And this is in terms of fast flow areas where we've got clean and sandy gravels. It's really important just to state quickly that chalk streams are not just about sands and gravels. There's also important members of the flora and fauna community that also thrive in the right sediments. And again, these species in these areas of sedimentation, good sedimentation, because there's also very bad sedimentation in chalk streams. But again, this just highlights the importance of trying to hit those key water quality parameters in terms of associated species away from our faster flow areas. So the real plan for the project is to restore 2,500 metres of chalk stream habitat across rural and urban sites. We're going to use cost-effective techniques just to sustain, I guess, existing chalk stream microhabitats to try and build up some really valuable and robust data for long-term research. We're going to enhance 2 spring heads. One of the issues we've noticed whilst developing the project is a lot of the spring heads are unmanaged, and without sustained management, we really do need to look at our chalk streams like a chalk grassland or a woodland, and our spring heads like a chalk, where there's an annual maintenance regime which is funded, and we need to really promote and champion that chalk streams and spring heads need continuous management. One of the big issues in chalk streams, especially in Cambridgeshire, is sedimentation. And we really do need to understand our good and our bad sediments. And what we do know is from other studies is too many sediments is having a catastrophic effect on fish spawning, invertebrate spawning for things like mayfly, caddisflies. And so we really need to understand more about our sediment and putting in, I guess, landscape scale sediment control features. We really want to work with communities, empower communities, academic institutions and local authorities to participate in research and champion and advocate for stronger conservation practices and policy shifts. And part of the project is we really want to highlight that the issues with chalk streams are not in channel. It's a holistic issue within the landscape, and part of the project will be promoting regenerative farming. So the key issues we're going to address through our case study research: agricultural runoff, sewage, urban pollution. We really want to understand more about the pollution train through the landscape. We need to understand more about our sedimentation, our sources, the impacts on future river restoration, on, for example, choosing the right sites for things like fish spawning. We want to work to contribute to data to look at the issues of things like over abstraction and provide valuable data for habitat encroachment. The project will have a real focus on urban development as well, looking at things like the issues of development and finding innovative solutions to try and retain some of our magical chalk streams, which we're very lucky in Cambridge City that, we have some functioning chalk streams, although, they're suffering a lot of issues. With a collaborative approach, there's a real opportunity to demonstrate some fantastic future management of chalk streams. And we also really need to be aware of climate change, how unpredictable events such as flash flooding, unexpected, unseasonal rising temperatures, how are we going to put in long-term plans to mitigate these issues and create resilient chalk streams? We've also got to look at part of the project's looking at research of innovation. How are we going to address some of the complex issues and urban challenges such as water quality, flow management, i.e. how are we going to manage biodiversity, getting through things like culverts that will cost millions and millions of pounds to replace. And if we can't replace them, what solutions are we going to use? How are we going to sustain migration and connectivity in heavily modified areas where there is no flow or there's very low flow? So it's just looking at a variety of and trialing a variety of methods just to keep, I guess, the movement of fish passage and the movement of invertebrates and macrophytes, trying to work out methods to keep sustaining these. And as I've said, we've agreed now a monitoring and data collection project with a minimum of 12 months weekly monitoring at 6 case study sites, working with an academic partner and working with citizen scientists. And we will collect essential data on water quality, sediment transport and species health. And again, the real onus is to launch the project and work closely with the community and train and empower as many volunteers as possible, working with professionals and academics. The rural sites we've chosen are in Linton and Abington, and the urban sites we've chosen in the city are Hobson's Brook, Cherry Hinton Brook, with some work ongoing on Coldham's Brook, where again, just to repeat, we're going to investigate sediment sources, monitor erosion, which I mean, sedimentation is a real problem because it's causing clogging in the gravels and sands, which is reducing oxygen for those vital larval stages of the invertebrates and the egg stages of a variety of fish species. We want to really champion improving bankside vegetation to enhance biodiversity and reduce things like localized sedimentation. We want to survey the impacts on people's health and well-being. Like, look, you know, by improving our chalk streams, how does it really benefit our health? That's an important important data to collate in terms of getting funding, getting new organisations on board. We want to get data on habitat fragmentation and urban runoff. I think degraded water quality is, I mean, we've just heard about some of the depressing issues at the COP. When we come back to a much more localised environment, water quality degradation is quite a depressing picture. However, people like me have to try and work collaboratively to find solutions. We want to look at pilot projects to enhance vegetation for better habitat connectivity and water quality. And again, as I've highlighted, we're going to look at springhead restoration at 9 Wells and Giant's Grave, where we restore the water flow, retain habitat complexity, and in urban situations, we've got projects to install nature-based solutions to reduce pollution. And we've got to address issues such as invasive species like Crassula hemsley, and we've got issues with Himalayan balsam throughout the region in terms of bankside erosion, and signal crayfish are prolifically horrendous for chalk streams. We need to look at solutions to try and reduce their impact. And one of the final project demonstrations is this focus on regenerative farming. And we've got a site where we're trying to really highlight that managing chalk streams can be kilometres from the channel, and we want to demonstrate things like rainwater harvesting, you know, utilising water. Water is such an important resource. Let's not rely on our boreholes, our mains. Let's try and use whatever source we can, and looking at features which have the percolation and infiltration for small-scale aquifer recharge. And our Shardlow's Foam regenerative farming site also is to serve as an education site for communities, institutions, other landowners. And again, it's really promoting sustainable practices. What we need, I guess, as a local authority is, it's very exciting that we're in Cambridgeshire now, and we've got lots of catchment partnerships developing. And what I guess local authorities would really benefit from is being led by holistic restoration plans and evidence-led catchment plans. And this would help us with supporting and funding holistic restoration, understanding and supporting sediment management, supporting projects for habitat connectivity, restoring and enhancing our existing ecological corridors, and looking at geodiversity is we've really got to get more understanding of our geodiverse landscape in terms of chalk stream management for the future. This is especially relevant to pollution, aquifer recharge, and it would be really, really good to work with partners to get a really definitive, detailed map of chalk streams, including those hidden tributaries that still retain chalk stream flora and fauna, and have a definitive map to kind of demonstrate and show where we still have good water quality, good habitats. One of the big issues, and I won't spend too much on it, but other issues, I guess, the local council would need to be led on in terms of catchment plans are things like how are we going to manage the issue of nitrate in the aquifer, some sort of guidance on climate change models to prepare for future risks and create, fund restoration projects that are resilient to climate change development. We'd love to, when we're providing this robust data, we'd love to see various organisations lobby for nutrient neutrality, because it's such a key issue for chalk streams. Controversial, but my project's very much a biodiversity-led project with the focus on preserving and enhancing biodiversity, and having nutrient neutral chalk streams would be nutrient neutral management throughout the landscape for chalk streams would be highly beneficial. It's essential to work using evidence-based action, especially in terms of getting future funding. Part of our project is to ensure that all our projects are funded pre and post project. And this is to track ecological improvements over time and assess whether restoration works or not. That's a really important thing, is to not just understand the positives, but also understand anything that we're doing in channel or in the landscape that's not working. And then this really helps with future funding and redesigning funding grants and agreements. That a lot of funding just funds the actual creation or recreation project, but for long-term management of chalk streams, we need funding for things like post-project maintenance, essential habitat management, and as some of the springheads and some chalk streams within our area demonstrate that there's a lack of ongoing resource. So the conclusion is the Greater Cambridge Chalk Stream Project is going to, well, it has done in development and will utilise diverse expertise. The Greater Cambridge Chalk Stream Project and the local authority are fortunate to collaborate with a diverse group of stakeholders. We welcome opportunities to integrate and support in any catchment partnerships. We want to adopt a collaborative approach, and as I've said, there's no right or wrong approach. The key is using solutions, using evidence base, and we're excited to be part of a collaborative effort now in chalk streams. It's taken us a while to get up and running, but we're very excited, and I guess the Greater Cambridge Chalk Stream Project is very much, we realise we're restricted with funding. Therefore, we've really focused on using just the case study site approach to build up and share robust data, share our knowledge, and we're hoping that from this we can make a long-term contribution to protect our precious chalk streams. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Rob. I mean, what a huge amount of material for us to chew over. And to that point, the first question really is, can you share the slides so people were trying to take notes, and I can have say they've had a fairly challenging task in keeping notes from the richness of that presentation. But for me, I've just taken the immense reassurance that you're on the job and that City Council has commissioned this work. So that's the first and important step. I also particularly like the phrase "not in channel but in landscape" as well as a lesson to take away. But there's been a significant number of questions in the chat, and if I could ask, and it's imposing on you somewhat because we're on a tight schedule this morning, can you, when you have a moment, when we go on to the next presentation, begin to answer some of those questions in the chat and put some links in? There's been, for instance, a request about Cressula and what about the particular approaches might be taken to its removal, and also about restoring springs in chalk locations. But as I say, I think unless there's any burning questions that people haven't yet put in chat, we'll move on to the next presentation. If anybody has got a question, can you put your hand up verbally? As I say, there's a huge amount there, Rob, and I'm so grateful for you giving your time this morning to bring us up to date. Right, thank you very much indeed. So we're on to, again, it's another water related issue about the New Cambridgeshire reservoir. We've got the team in from Anglian Waters Day, led by Karen and a number of colleagues. So if I think, Karen, are you leading on the presentation, or is it Claudia?
I will start and do some intros, and then we'll hand over to Matt Hobbs, who's joining us this morning from our environment team.
Thank you.
Well, I think he is here, isn't he? I haven't checked. I'm assuming he is on the meeting.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, I think
Karen.
it. Oh yeah, hi Matt.
Hi.
Morning to you.
Can I
Same,
just
because I was gonna.
You can see that full screen, or can you just see?
No, can you? Thanks, Claudia. Can you make it full screen if possible?
I can try. Hang on a second.
Oh, well done. And yeah, I understand you've been speaking to Claudia, who leads on our relationships with organisations such as Natural Cambridgeshire. And I know we have done some briefings previously to Natural Cambridgeshire and to many of you on this call. It's nice to see some familiar names and faces this morning. And as I say, there are some people will have been briefed about the reservoir project previously. Some are actually intricately involved in the project with us. So there'll be different levels of knowledge. Really, the focus for this presentation is to get Matt along today to talk about the environmental considerations and aspects of the reservoir. So I'll do a brief intro, and then Matt will carry on. But obviously Claudia's here, and we've also got Kate Wagg here as well, who's our EIA, Environmental Impact Assessment lead. So
just bear with me a second. Sorry,
no worries.
I'm struggling because I can't. When I share it full screen, I can't share it on Zoom. I can.
Well, do you want to just go with non-full screen, Claudia? And
yeah, okay. Sorry
if
about
that's
this.
okay.
Okay, just bear with me one more moment.
No worries.
Can you see that?
Oh, perfect. Yeah, you've gone to full screen. That's perfect.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, great.
Thanks, Claudia. Cheers. Thank you. Yeah, do you want to go to the next slide? That's fine.
Oh, I think it takes a while.
Yeah.
There we go.
That's great. So thank you again, and thanks for asking us to come and speak. So really the point of this presentation with you this morning is to just highlight some of those aspects around how the reservoir will consider nature in its design, some of the sort of aspects that we're working on within that design development around the environment, and how there's opportunities for nature, for the environment moving forward on the project. So Matt will go through all those. He'll go a little bit through the habitat design process, so those environmental considerations, particularly looking at wetland and target species in Fenland, and talk around some of the engagement we've had to date. So let's go to the next slide. So just a sort of a heads up summary around the overarching need for the project. So as I'm sure you're all very aware with these three pillars that we roll out, but basically, as you're aware, we're a low-lying region, one of the driest in the UK. We are in a region with significant growth predicted with new homes, etc. But also fundamentally for the reservoirs, the potential with this reservoir is it gives us the opportunity to reduce the amount of water we're taking from those precious chalk aquifers that referred to earlier. So there are some really sort of key sort of pillars that underpin the need for the reservoir. I suppose just also to say that project need is set out in our water resources management plans, which many of you will be familiar with, and the reservoir is our sort of long-term plan for water resilience in the future. On a short term, we obviously have all our work around leak reduction, all our projects around water efficiency, water saving. At the medium term, we have things like our strategic pipe alliance, which is taking water from the wetter parts of our area down to the drier parts, and so really the reservoirs are that long-term resilient plan. If you want to go to the next slide, please, Claudia. Okay, and then just this is the last one for me, just that sort of high level indicative timeline. So this project is a nationally significant infrastructure project, and therefore it goes through the development consent order, the DCO process, which is signed off by the Secretary of State. To get that planning permission, there's a timeline of activity, which I'm sure many of you will be aware of. And we're really in this early phase at the start of this timeline. So in sort of since 2022 until sort of 2025, we'll be continuing to do our pre-application phase. And this is where we engage with stakeholders in order to develop and design the project ready for planning permission application. We held a consultation last year, and we are looking to hold another phase of consultation next year, where we'll have developed our designs further. We expect or aim to submit our DCOs for 2026, 2027, to hopefully have gone through that process by 2029, with a real push for reservoir being in supply by 2036. So although it sounds a long way off, there's quite a tight program of works to get through in order to get to that point of supply. And so just to repeat, the DCO is the development consent order, so it's the planning permission that we have to get in order to deliver the project. Okay, I think I'll now hand over to Matt, and he will talk to you through the design and the environmental considerations.
Thanks, Karen.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, if you could just go to the next slide, Claudia, thanks. So, hi, thanks for inviting us here to talk to you about the project. I'm the habitat design lead for the project, working within the ecology team. I've only really got time to give you a brief overview of what we're trying to do to help nature through the Fens Reservoir project, but I hope it's useful to some or all of you. First of all, I want to emphasize the size of the project. It's closer in size to Grafham Water than Rutland Water, which is shown with the reservoir outline superimposed on the left, but there's still a very large area of open water, containing about 55 million cubic meters of water at capacity, and with a surface area of around 5 square kilometres and an embankment length of 8 kilometres. In terms of habitat area, the reservoir design is limited by the fact that it's a non-impounding reservoir. So the embankment height will be around 10 to 15 metres with relatively steep slopes and no contours in the landscape that we can use to create larger areas of shallow water or marginal wetland as we can for the Lincolnshire Reservoir, which some of you might be familiar with as well. As a consequence, much of our wetland habitat will be created in lower lying land outside of the reservoir embankment. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the latest master plan with the broad zoning of the reservoir and adjacent land. The emphasis of the master plan is on striking a balance between people and nature, in the sense that some areas of habitat will be more disturbed by recreational activity than others, and so potentially less suitable for species that are susceptible to disturbance, like, for example, breeding wildfowl or waders. In the north, there is the lagoon and central terrace, which is a recreational hub, but which still includes a large area of wetland creation. In the northeast quarter, the reservoir is currently zoned so that there is a wildlife refuge undisturbed by recreation, but also with extensive wetland fringes and an extensive area of wetland habitat located outside the reservoir. In the southeast, there's another large area of wetland that is closest to the Ouse washes and mostly protected from recreational disturbance. And in the southwest, there's an area of watercourse and wetland with a network of paths and active travel routes offering access from Chatteris. And also south of the first 40-foot drain, there's a large area that may be required for environmental mitigation and enhancement that's kind of yet to be confirmed at the moment. So next slide, please. So this slide this slide shows briefly the and visually the zonation of the reservoir into sort of more active or people-focused areas to the west and more passive or habitat or nature-focused areas to the east, as I've just described in the previous slide. So next slide. Just moving on to the overall design vision and design principles. The vision is formed around these three core areas of people, nature and water. The reservoir is not only designed to be a focus for socio-economic activity and recreation, but there is an emphasis on people interacting with nature and water, and for that to have a benefit for community health and well-being. We want to provide a restored fenland landscape with an emphasis on creating multifunctional wetland that will provide, these multiple benefits for nature, the wider environment and local people. And it's also worth mentioning, given Rob's presentation, that one of the benefits we're hoping for is to reduce abstraction from chalk streams as well. So next slide. So there's a number of key design principles, 3 of which have a focus on nature and habitat. I've already talked about some of these, like the balance between recreation, access and disturbance. And the master plan makes it fairly clear that we're focusing on wetland, although there will be large areas of woodland, grassland, scrubland and other habitats hopefully incorporated into the final design. Wetland comes first, I think, as the defining habitat of the historic fenland landscape, and also because this landscape needs wetland for many reasons. We want to help drive this priority to deliver multiple environmental and socio-economic benefits, and to also support restoring fenland through, an existing framework of legislative policy drivers, which include things like the local nature recovery strategy, and also through this connecting the site to an ever-growing network of local nature restoration sites within the wider fenland area. So next slide, please. Yeah, and on again to the next one. So as well as our aspirations for, hopefully a nature-rich future for the project, we also have some challenges and opportunities to achieve that. This is just a quick summary of some of the more important environmental considerations. So biodiversity net gain became mandatory earlier this year, and we've carried out initial calculations that indicate we're on target to exceed area-based and hedgerow habitat requirements of 10% net gain. But we do need to create wetland to balance the loss of mostly agricultural ditches and watercourses across the site. We'll also need to create wetland to rehome water voles that currently inhabit many of those ditches. We've also recently submitted an HRA screening document, or habitat regulations assessment, which looks at potential impacts on European Natura 2000 sites like the Ouse and Nean washes. So as the project design develops, we'll consider mitigation and compensation measures that may become necessary, which may also lead to further habitat creation opportunities. One of these sort of impact pathways is the potential impact of INS, or invasive non-native species, moving across catchments in reservoir water. So next slide, please. So I won't go into details on this slide as we're short of time, but it's here to just give you an idea of the level of technical assessment that will be needed to inform the wetland design. This work is led by the habitat design team, but it's interdisciplinary, and it will require a lot of careful coordination across the project team. It's well underway at the moment, but the focus at the moment is currently on feasibility and refining sort of options for where we can place wetland and what kind of wetland we can create. So next slide. Right, I've included this slide here mainly to emphasise that we're very aware of the fenland context and of striking the right balance between creating multifunctional resilient habitats that will develop naturally or rewild, if you like, and the importance of deliberately creating habitats and managing them actively over time to target species that are characteristic of fenland or potentially threatened or declining species. So we're not really at this stage of design yet, but we've been developing our aspirations mostly in terms of working out which habitat types we should be considering, given the feasibility to create them and what they would need to deliver to support species like bittern, swallowtail butterfly or greater water parsnip, like I've shown here. So next slide. So the best way of developing these aspirations, in my opinion, and the opinion of the project team, is to talk to the people who know and understand these issues, which is why I'm talking to you now. Engagement is hugely important to this project. There are many stakeholders, and it's crucial for us to try and gain a consensus so that we have a deliverable project and we have a project that achieves the aspirations of local communities and stakeholders. So we have a framework for formal engagement through the technical working groups, of which there's one for habitat design, and probably a number of you are already engaged in that process. We've also been carrying out site visits to nature reserves and restoration sites and meeting with site managers and experts to steer our design in the right direction. We'll continue, obviously, to seek out your advice throughout the course of the project. So that was all I really wanted to say. So hopefully we've got a bit of time for questions, but maybe we haven't.
No, I think you've done
says.
with the team very well, Karen, Matt, keeping us, will bring us close back to time. We've got time for, I think, a few questions. And there's been a debate going on in the chat. I don't know if some have seen about the lack of ambition or otherwise in the project, and the response that Karen has already provided in that area. I don't intend to open that debate this morning because I think we would go on for a very long time having that debate. But there are some very factual questions I picked up in the chat. One was just explanation. I've had to get used to becoming into this world, to a new set of acronyms. What does DCO stand for, as Elizabeth has asked?
Yeah, sorry, I have put replied to all of the chat, but yeah, it's a development consent order, so that's just the planning process. And sorry for the acronyms, they are awful. I agree. And just coming back to the comment about the lack of ambition, I mean, I really disagree with that comment actually, and I have put a link in the chat to our design report, which sets out the ambition and what the vision and principles are around environment, because there are some really great opportunities there, and our aim is to have that the legal minimum is to have that 10% BNG, but we'll know that we're highly likely to significantly exceed that, and there are some really good opportunities. So I really strongly recommend looking at that report if people are interested.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I take it then also, Karen, you've answered the question on, because if you've done it directly, on day yield for Stephen and Simon regarding angling permits.
What was the question about angling? I've lost the chat.
There was one about permits. What's the strategy for permit angling?
Yeah, we're just not at that. I mean, we really are early stage of design development. We're not at that stage yet. Although all of the feedback coming back from stakeholders, there is a keen desire to see angling at the reservoir. As you know, our other reservoirs, we do have angling that happens there. I would envisage it would be the same terms as we have at our other reservoirs, but as I say, it is still early days, and that's sort of in the next level of detail, although all those comments around angling have been noted for that more detailed design phase. And
there was thank you very much. There was a straightforward question, actual question from Stephen about the megalith day yield, what that might be. If I understood what a megalith day yield was, I could answer that question better.
So the
megalitres, I'm sorry.
All right.
Sorry, it turned megalith.
That's right. I thought it was a new sort of dinosaur or something.
So it's 87 megalitres, and the full capacity of the reservoir is 55 million cubic litres.
Okay, and can you therefore answer Alan's question?
If I can see the
Will
chat,
the reservoir actually enable Cambridge Water to reduce abstraction? Because if it doesn't do that,
yeah, I mean,
doing
yeah,
anything at all to help chalk streams.
yeah. Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I mean that is one of our key reasons for looking at reservoirs for a long-term solution, is so that we can, prevent those outgoing abstractions from the chalk aquifer. So that is one of our key ambitions.
So what's the target megalitres per day for that?
For what? Sorry,
for the reduction of abstraction
from for Cambridge Water. So roughly, the abstractions will be roughly 50%, 50% to Anglian Water, 50% to Cambridge Water.
Yes. So what's the answer to the question?
So that's half of 80. So it's roughly 44.
Right. And Cambridge at the moment needs at least 80, running up to 100.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, can you get 60 to 70% reduction in actual abstraction, which is what the Environment Agency have been asking for? I think we need another reservoir to do that.
Okay. As I said, there's also our other projects that are ongoing. So we'll have our strategic pipeline in place by then, which will be taking water from other parts of the wetter parts of our region. So that'll be another way in which we will ensure the sufficiency of water, along with all the other measures that are taking place through Cambridge Water with regards to water saving initiatives, etc., etc. So.
Yeah, we need to move to a chalk streams first model.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Stephen.
Mentioned, and it's a target that this county and city needs to embrace. Otherwise, we're not being at all an exemplar of sustainable development.
I agree, and Stephen, you do give us some great feedback on the reservoirs and all our other projects, so we do appreciate your ongoing feedback.
Well, thank you, Karen, for that response. Thanks, Stephen, for raising the issue. And I have to say also from Natural Cambridgeshire's point of view, water and relation to the chalk streams is a major project we've been discussing a number of times before, not least in terms of farm level reservoirs and how they might make a contribution to this.
Yeah, I'll answer the other questions in the chat while you continue, and then and as I said, the details for the website are there. If there's any other questions, please do send them in.
Thank you very much indeed.
No worries.
Thanks to the whole team for being with us this morning, and hopefully you can continue with us as we get to our next presentation, which is around our Fens future, exploring the case for change. And Faye, you're up.
Yeah. Hi, morning everyone.
Hiya.
My name's Faye Scott, and I'm one of the engagement advisors on the Fens programme. And I'm also joined today by Andy Bailey, and he's our senior strategy advisor. I don't know if you can see him on the call, but he's going to hopefully share the slides for me.
So if you have any issues, let me know. And we seem to be okay this side to share them.
Okay, so I'm not very used to Zoom, as we do everything on Teams. So it's sort of sharing.
Is it coming through, Faye?
Here we go. Fabulous. Thank you very much. So really thanks very much for the opportunity sort of to present to you today about the programme. So I'm just really going to give you an overview of the Fens programme and just tell you a bit more about the work that we've been doing with stakeholders in the Fens to really explore the case for change and really look at what the future could look like, using 4 different narratives. And they are community resilience, food and farming, nature and carbon. So these insights really came from a series of workshops which were held in April this year. And I think Natural Cambridge were actually involved with those workshops as well. And these insights really will help sort of shape our partnership investment plan, which will be published next year in the autumn. So if I could have the next slide, please. Yeah, so this slide really just gives you an overview of the programme. So the Fens 2100 programme covers 5 catchments, as you can see on the map. So we cover the Great Ouse, the Lower Nene, the Lower Welland, the Witham and the Steeping. And it was only sort of specific place measure mentioned in the flood coast risk management strategy, and it actually states, as you can see on the screen there, that by 2025 the Environment Agency will work with farmers, land managers, water companies, internal drainage boards and other partners to develop a long-term plan for managing future flood risk in the Fens. So the Fens programme is really responsible for developing a strategic case for continued investment in flood risk management across the Fens landscape. And it's also about sort of setting out those flood risk management investment choices that are required to ensure that we have, you know, a really vibrant and flourishing Fens landscape that's adapting to the challenges of climate change. So if I could have the next slide, please. So the Fens programme is a partnership programme. It's made up of organisations that operate in the Fens. And for the programme to be a success, we really need to work collaboratively with our partners, sharing evidence and information and be more joined up and holistic in our thinking. And this will help inform local, regional and national decision makers so this landscape can adapt to climate change into the future. And if I could have the next slide, please. So the Fens programme's main focus is future flood risk. So as you know, the Fens is an artificial system. It's been drained in the 1600s, and it consists of nearly 17,000 flood risk management assets, such as your pumping stations, floodgates, sea defences, etc. And these were sort of primarily built in the 1960s. They're in a really bad state of repair due to the lack of funding, maintenance and investment in this landscape. And of course, they have to be managed 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year. So one of the projects we're doing is actually to produce 5 baseline reports, and that's one for each catchment. And that they look at really our flood risk management assets in the catchment, all the assets we've got. They look at their current condition, they look at their future flood risk, and they sort of give an indication as to when in the future they are likely to fail. We're also looking at the costs to operate these assets as well as the benefits that they provide. So the baseline reports are due out in autumn next year, and that's, as I've said before, the sort of same time that our partnership investment plan is being launched. So we're working with our partners at the moment to produce the partnership investment plan, and that will set out the strategic case for continued investment in our assets across the Fens. And it will also provide a sort of tangible action plan that will explain how to enable our future asset investment choices. And after this, we're going to be producing an integrated asset management strategy, and that really will confirm the immediate and medium sort of term investment requirements over the next sort of 25 years, which were needed across each catchment. So if I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So earlier in the year then, we sort of hosted a series of online and face-to-face workshops, and we involved organisations from different sectors across the Fens. We've heard from many organisations that there needs to be change in the way we manage our flood risk assets into the future. We looked at the changes needed in current investment practices for each of the 4 futures which were developed at the workshops. So the 4 futures that were developed are, the first one is communities are connected in the face of the changing climate. So this future is all about sort of communities valuing the heritage of water in the Fens. You know, they're really informed about flood resilience. Local plans are sort of, you know, focused on resilient growth. And there's also, of course, many jobs in high-tech agriculture and ecotourism. So what do we need to sort of unlock this future? So we think, sort of, just to give you a flavour, sort of what we think you'd need is sort of more education on flood risk management and climate change messaging. We really need skills developments, you know, and plans to help local people access new skills and employment. So the next future is the Fens is the key to UK food production. So this future really focuses on using the best quality land for high value food crops. There's a lot of innovation in agro-technology, and there is really clear regional government policy. And the kind of things we need to unlock this future is sort of more access to learning and research institutions. We really need a central policy on rural land use. We need to understand the wider benefits of agriculture. And we really need more financial support for capital costs, particularly sort of on-farm water storage. So the next feature is the Fens is a carbon sink. This feature focuses on the protection of lowland peat and really embedding in all aspects of the planning system. The focus on carbon credits and offsetting, you know, carbon strategies are woven into all Fens policy making and mechanisms, and sort of ecosystem services are really valued. So the kind of things we need to do to unlock this is sort of more sort of widely held skills in carbon accounting and carbon measurement, and, you know, successful launch of the peatland code and natural capital and things like that. And so finally, if I go on to the next slide, and the future you're sort of being more likely to be most interested in is the Fens is a haven for wildlife. So this future is really similar to your vision for Natural Cambridge. So this future would mean that the local nature recovery strategies were successful. The Fens was really healthy, it was connected, it was a resilient ecosystem, which is rich in wildlife. Environmental groups, local people, the farming community are prioritising nature-based solutions and peatland restoration. There's going to be more nature-friendly farming techniques, improved biodiversity and water quality. Wildlife decline has been reversed and wildlife is thriving. There is space for nature, and nature strategies are woven into all of the Fens policy making. Natural flood management is a key feature, and there also will be access to nature for all. So what do we need to unlock this? Well, we kind of think we need sort of several things, but really need some coordination, better coordination between organisations for sort of defined nature recovery outcomes. We need to understand ecosystem services better and value them better. Natural capital needs to be really understood and used much more widely. So just to note then, so all these futures really can contribute to sort of a vibrant and climate resilient landscape. So no future is intended to represent an isolated story, rather it's a rich tapestry of plausible ambitions for this landscape. So I could have the next slide. Oh, we're on it, it's fine. Yeah, so this slide, so I won't go through this slide in a lot of detail because of time, but this is just some of the adaptation measures for the different futures. So just to pick up on the sort of nature future, so measures could include sort of managed retreat, realignment, really focusing on protecting our species, our landscape, our habitats, and sort of soft measures of sort of more community engagement and participation in nature recovery. Thank you. So that's really just sort of a whistle-top tour of this work. But if you'd like to know more, we do have like a booklet that will explains this work in much more detail. So I will send a copy to Helen and Peter. But if anyone else would like a copy, just please sort of message in the chat or email the Fens mailbox. So we'd really like to sort of hear from you and see how this work aligns with your strategic vision. So, you know, please do get in touch. And finally, we do have a stakeholder forum in February, which you'd all be welcome to attend. So I will forward on the details nearer the time. And yeah, so that's it. So yeah, open the floor to questions, please.
Faye, thanks very much indeed. That was really interesting and food for thought. if we have any questions for Faye, grateful to have them. The debate has gone on, continued on about the reservoir in the background.
That's okay.
As well, but I think there was one point I think from Sue regarding the agricultural use of the fens, particularly around wheat, and how that has an overall effect. So the coordination between the different parties and interest groups within the fens.
Yes, well, we do have a climate change risk assessment, which I was going to sort of talk about in January, but that has lots of sort of evidence, particularly around farming, agriculture, and particularly about the wheat. So I don't know if Andy, you want to pick up on anything?
Sorry, what was the question? I was just catching up with the chat.
The Green Alliance has calculated that growing wheat on fenland has a carbon footprint 7 times larger than the soya grown in the Brazilian Amazon. So clearly potentially damaging to the long-term health of the fens and elsewhere.
I'm not aware of that research. I'm not sure what the question is.
Well, the extension of the question is, when you're trying to decide what food should be grown in the fens, how do you calculate the wider impacts of it rather than just the value of it?
Trying to determine the future of the fens is not something the Environment Agency are looking at. The Fens 2100 project is identifying the risks and challenges, and the climate change risk assessment identifies that a strategic approach, a multi-sector approach to the future of the fens is needed. Agriculture and food security is one of the challenges and one of the priorities which we need to address, but that's bigger and outside the remit of the Environment Agency. Fens 2100 is looking at flood risk management, but we need to work across those sectors to determine how we do that.
So are you managing to draw those other sectors in?
Yes.
So they will be considering these questions.
Yeah, but the technical detail around that carbon balance that Fens 2100 itself is not looking at.
Thank you, Sue. Rob.
Thank you. So happy to respond in part to your question. It's Rob Wise with the National Farmers Union. So I am also a trustee of Natural Cambridgeshire, and I'm also on the programme board for Fens 2100 Plus. So yes, the NFU farming is very much at the heart of these discussions. In terms of the question about carbon emissions from the peat, yes, there's no denying that carbon emissions producing crops on peatland soils are higher than producing them elsewhere. Wheat is part of a crop rotation of very high value produce coming out of the fens that produces all of our salad and root crops for the nation as a whole. So it's to isolate wheat grown in the fens versus soya grown in Brazil just doesn't give you the context of what agricultural production in the fens is all about. That said, Fenland farmers, through Fenland Soil, Sustainability Opportunities, Innovation and Learning, is a farmer-led organisation that is actually exploring all the ways to reduce the carbon footprint of producing agricultural output in the fens, because we recognise it's a big problem. But at the other side of the scale, the fens supports a £3 billion food supply industry and supplies 80% of the country's salad crops. So, it's not something that we're going to walk away from overnight. We're going to try and make it more reasonable. And certainly in terms of coming back to the subject matter of today, flood risk management in the fens, we want to protect the 80,000 jobs that are associated with the food supply chain in the fens and not have it all flooded and underwater.
Yeah. So there's another interesting discussion for another session on the longevity of the fens with what they're currently doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob, and thanks, Sue. Peter, had your hand up.
There was a meeting a couple of weeks ago by an organisation specifically concerned with climate change in the fens. and they said it was urgent to take action now to stop us all being flooded from the wash. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I think, yes, that's what we're trying to say, that we've got to start making the actions now to, you know, determine a better future.
That's the findings of the climate change risk, the Fens climate change risk assessment from the future Fens integrated adaptation task force, which was published 2 weeks ago approximately. So that's probably what you're referring to. Yeah, and that does highlight some very significant challenges. I'll put a link in the chat to where you can see that climate change risk assessment.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Faye. We're just about ready to move on to our final presentation. If I go missing, it's because I'm having a coughing fit here. I'm just about trying to maintain myself to actually get through the next part of the stage, but I shall be there in the background. And we're over to our director at Natural Cambridgeshire and co-chair of the steering group for the LNRS, Pamela, for an update on the local nature recovery strategy. Pamela, over to you.
Thank you, and hopefully you can all see my screen now. This is a picture of John Clare countryside, where we had a conference yesterday looking at this really important habitat, one of our priority habitats, and part of Natural Cambridgeshire's initial contribution to the local nature recovery strategy. Just for those of you who perhaps haven't caught up with what this is, every local authority in England, all 48, are commissioned to create a local nature recovery strategy to say how they will recover nature in their area. And for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, the combined authority are in charge, and they are the responsible authority, and they have delegated this to a production team that involves the county council, and to a steering group that involves representatives from Natural Cambridgeshire, from the statutory authorities, and from all of the local authorities who are named as supporting authorities in this. This work is underway. I gave an update in September, so I won't linger too much on that kind of underpinning detail of it. But just to say that our vision is for our local nature recovery strategy is that we will create a wildlife-rich, resilient, productive, and sustainable landscape. Just realised the difficulty of this is that I just need to move you up there. And so this aligns with Natural Cambridgeshire's vision to double nature. We originally set this out by 2050. We are encouraged to be more ambitious by the combined authority, and have currently set this at moving from around 8 to 9% of land managed for nature in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough to more than 16% by 2040, whilst also maintaining our sort of rich heritage of a farmed landscape, which is productive and also rich in wildlife as well. And featuring in this, as you might expect from hearing today, are the functioning wetlands and also our chalk streams, as well as this kind of corridors of abundant biodiversity threading through the landscape and particularly into our urban areas as well. And of course, we're not starting from scratch. And this is a little preview of the document that will be coming out to you, all of you on our mailing list in the next couple of weeks, which is Actions for Nature. So this is a Natural Cambridgeshire production led by Helen and Peter Lansoff, detailing all of the actions that are already being taken for nature, and particularly those that have been happening in our priority landscapes, but also throughout Cambridgeshire from all of our Cambridgeshire and Peterborough from all of our partners. And this work is sort of underpinning how we will be developing our local nature strategy as well. So one of the things we need to do as part of the local nature strategy is produce a map of the current biodiversity. So this is all of the internationally designated areas, such as our Ramsar sites, our Habitats Directive land, essentially, and Birds Directive, but also our nationally significant sites, our sites of special scientific interest and our national nature reserves, as well as local nature reserves and sites which are currently flagged as being of importance. And we've been working with the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Record Centre to produce this map. And this map will form part of the public consultation, which I'll talk about later. So that's kind of what is there already. And then in addition to these particular sites, we are looking at the wider benefits. So the wider benefits of those functioning ecosystems, the carbon and the water benefits of having functioning wetlands. We heard yesterday from Tony Juniper, Chair of Natural England, around all of the benefits for nature in urban landscapes in terms of climate, in terms of cleaner water, in terms of water flow, so water flow for nature and water flow for people, which we know is such a difficulty in our particular area. In addition, our soil health and the impact that has on productive agriculture, and that if we have these functioning wetlands, then the flood alleviation that this will have, not just for our towns and cities, but also for our farmed landscape. And so just a brief update on what's happening now. We have a production team and we benefit from our local authority ecologists and our ecologists associated with our environmental NGOs, such as the Wildlife Trust, some of whom are on here today, who are hugely grateful. And we've been working through two main work streams, really. One is around the species, where we're very much given a way of looking at this by Natural England, which is to say, where are those species which are threatened globally? Where are those species which are of significance locally? Where have we previously had all of these species in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough designated as part of our, not designated, but listed as part of biodiversity action plans, and bringing all of that together in a list of currently 142 species, which we feel are of significance in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And some of those will have particular action plans associated with them, but a lot of those will be gathered together in species assemblages that relate to the habitat, which is then managed. There are some fantastically named grass poly, fairy shrimps from our temporary pools, dark leaf willow. We have some fantastic species. We have micro species of smooth-leaved elms, and we have micro species of Goldilocks buttercups in our churchyards and our roadsides. So all of these are being considered. We had all of our local recorders coming in and saying what species are of importance, and this list has been curated and will be offered out as part of the public consultation. And a very, very important part of that has been the public consultation, where we asked everybody as part of our survey, what species are important to you. Similarly with our habitats, we are also looking at not only where are the important habitats that are currently existing, but where are the opportunities to create new habitats, opportunities to enhance habitats, to buffer and to connect habitats. And some of this work has been quite sticky because in a sense, it's relatively easy to model and to say, well, this is what should be there. And it's also relatively easy, if you had all the time in the world, to say, actually go out in every single field, what is there? But actually we have to marry those two things and look at those two data sets and say, well, actually from ground truthing all of this modelling and what we know, the work that's already been done with local authorities, that's already been done with local ecologists and some of the priority landscapes and in some of the landscape clusters of farmers and landowners, bringing together all of that evidence and then saying, okay, so what does that mean for where we are going to say in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, this is the areas that we feel we could create new habitat, we could buffer and we could enhance. And that is the work that's currently ongoing with our mapping providers, Natural Capital Solutions, and with our group of ecologists in particular. We're very grateful to Martin Baker and to Rowan Rumble, without wishing to kind of call out too many people, but we are really grateful for the input of everyone who's been part of this process. And currently under consideration as a result of this kind of very iterative process are our timelines for how we will be producing it. We had been one of the sort of 7 out of the 48 local authorities who we really thought that we had a good chance of meeting the very original timeline set out by DEFRA, which was to deliver our local strategy for publication or consultation in March next year. Just being realistic about wanting to gather in all of the appropriate evidence and input, we are now looking at revised timelines. And today, the Combined Authority Environment and Sustainable Communities Committee is looking at 2 options for a timeline for where we will be delivering this. There is a hiatus in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough because we have a mayoral election in the middle of next year. So between March and June, there will not be any consultation activity. And this is a statutory part of the local nature recovery strategy regulation and the process. So that creates, in a sense, an opportunity for us to have produced our draft document and then for informally socializing it without a formal consultation with all of those who've contributed to it so far. And then the aim is to take this strategy document to the June committee, where all of the local authorities will be represented, for them to sign this off as a draft that is good enough to go to consultation. And this will first of all go to all of the local authorities who will have 28 days. And then hopefully if that sign off is completed, there will be a public consultation that will start in July. The 2 options currently before the committee, who will be making that decision, are to have an 8-week consultation and a 12-week consultation. Should we have an 8-week consultation, this will go to mid-September. And then we hope that by giving the additional opportunities for these other sort of legal parts of the requirement, we'll be able to publish it just in time for Christmas next year. Should the consultation need to be longer, then that will then push into next year with an expected publication date of the 1st of March 2026. So that was all really I had to say on that. And so if anyone has any questions, do let me know.
Thanks very much, Pamela. And having been close to this work for you, you're keeping me briefed. I can see the huge amount of work that has been and continues to go in. One of the issues that Sue raises, hints, I think, Sue, at the issue of cross-boundary issues. An LNRS in each area takes no account of what nature does across boundaries. As some sort of reassurance in that area, we at Natural Cambridgeshire have been forming alliances with the LMPs on our boundaries with Essex and with Bedfordshire to have the potential for more joined up kind of action. So that's partially an answer there, but I do think there's a very real issue here about how we link the various local nature recovery strategies for each of the counties across the country. Pamela, is there anything wider on that you can bring to bear?
So we're certainly in touch with all of our neighbouring authorities, and many of our statutory agencies that look after some are often regional, as are our environmental NGOs that are part of the process. So that kind of neighbouring, where, I mean, certainly rivers and streams, but also landscapes where those come in. And I was in John Clare Countryside yesterday at a conference, and we were looking not just at the impact of the John Clare Countryside into Peterborough, but also into Stamford. So kind of looking out, and we've seen already looking at the different catchments, how those have an impact. So we're certainly taking it into account. I don't think we have the answer just yet, because every authority has been given the opportunity to develop all of these in different ways. And so that reaching out, we're all at slightly different timescales. You know, Essex is currently out for public consultation. We're not at that stage yet. So
can I just ask a little extra bit here? So one of the other things that kind of links to this is 2 things. One is land banking for offsetting opportunities, which may not fit in with our nature recovery strategies. And the other is with biodiversity net gain, you know, people offering habitat banks, which again may not fit with our local nature recovery strategy. I'm just trying to work out how do we have a mechanism for ensuring those things tied up so that that land would be where we want it to be rather than the choice of an investor.
So I think to a certain extent there may always be the choice of the investor, but we know that land that is identified as part of the local nature recovery strategy for nature recovery will have a strategic uplift in terms of the funding. I think, without being too unfair on my Natural England colleagues, let's say DEFRA have made this quite difficult for us, because where we might put, for example, an extensive area that could become a floodplain, we aren't able to just identify the whole of a river stretch. We are required to identify this at field scale or smaller. So I think that does present us with some difficulties, and that's what we have actually been wrestling with, and that's partly the cause of some of our delay, because we really want to get that as right as we possibly can. Just to come in on your land banking, and I see that a colleague from Bidwell's has got her hand up, but just come in with it. Natural Cambridgeshire is actually, in collaboration with the Wildlife Trust, going to start an independent register of all of the sites that are offered. So that is any landowner who would like to offer a site for biodiversity net gain to any developer or any local authority to signal that. Then because what we want to do on that is then add a layer where we will say, well, is this in a priority landscape? Is this in an area where you know, it has been identified as something? Obviously the strategic uplift will come later now, but before the local nature recovery strategy is published, then local authorities for their strategic BNG will be looking to existing local plans, for example, and existing strategies. And I think within that, one of the existing strategies is the priority landscapes and the kind of the doubling nature. So I think it's imperfect in the sense that we would love to have published it already. We would have loved to have been able to identify all of those areas. But I think we are doing our very best to work within the constraints to identify those best areas.
Sounds encouraging. Thank you.
I was just going to add on to what Pamela was saying, in that where you have habitat banks that are in a highly strategic area in the context of BNG, they will be delivering, I think it's 15% higher yield of biodiversity units than comparative sites not in those strategic areas. And so ultimately, in terms of commerciality, you know, it's far more attractive to be in that strategic area as a habitat bank provider, because you could probably be trading your biodiversity units at a lower cost because you've got more of them for the same amount of land for the same habitat works. There's obviously many other factors involved in pricing of those units, but from a commercial perspective and from an investor's perspective, there makes a lot of sense to be finding strategic, ecologically strategic locations for those habitat banks. So we'd hope that that's, you know, the trajectory that would come down, but ultimately, you know, a habitat bank could be created anywhere.
So to be encouraging about the whole thing, if they are in the strategic sites, you know that presumably there's so many people on the site course who know more than I do. The biodiversity value is actually greater because it's got connectivity.
Yeah, so it will be those areas that are either connected with or stepping stones for particular habitats of value. And that's why we're kind of working really closely with the local ecologist group, with Martyr Baker from the Wildlife Trust, who's conducted many of these surveys, not only with groups of landowners, but also for local authorities. So we're doing our very best to make sure that that land that is identified is of the best and the best opportunity. I think one of the issues is that what we're not saying is this land must be for biodiversity now, because we have no opportunity to say that. We're just saying this has great potential. And I know some of the challenges are, well, yeah, well, currently that's a playing field, but actually there might be a future thing that might say, actually, we want to change where our playing field is, and we want to move it elsewhere. And so I think some of our dilemma will be the extent to which we identify areas with other uses, and how the public feel about this, because we will be going out with our maps, and I think they will be imperfect despite all of our absolute best efforts. So I urge you all, when we come out to public consultation, hopefully in July next year, which feels like an age away, please take a look at these maps. Have we got it right? Are there some places that you think we should be identifying? Have we identified somewhere completely stupid that all of us overlooked? I mean, I showed that kind of map yesterday, and somebody from a parish council came up to me and said, "So what's this then?" And I was like, "I'm afraid I don't know." But that level of scrutiny, I think, will be really important, and that engagement will be really important. So we will be putting on structured engagements throughout the county, and we will particularly be wanting to go out to those landowner and farmer groupings that we took input from in the first place around all of this. But we've heard today so much of what we could be achieving for our chalk streams, for our wetlands, and we just really want to take all of those things into account as we move on. But it will be imperfect, and the next thing to do will be to implement it, and that will be where the challenge is. Sorry.
I think that's absolutely right, Pamela. One of the significant issues we discussed at the board meeting yesterday was the pressure on taking the LNRS to a wider constituency and audience. There's a presumption amongst people on this call of interest and some understanding, but actually taking it to a wider audience is really important, not least amongst the farming community. Perhaps will not have the same understanding of the BMG market, which is still very much in its infancy. So that's an important role going forward. And on that point about a wider community, and I just see that Quinton very helpfully has answered a question on will the LNRS will the community domestic gardens feature in the LNRS, or at least engagement with domestic gardeners? Engagement, but good to understand how we take it to that wider audience, Pamela.
So I think that in terms of mapping, we are unlikely to map everybody's gardens, but I think in terms of how this is enacted, it is really important. We know that so greater percentage of our population lives in urban areas, so I think it will be really important for us to not just only talk about the kind of the beautiful almost undisturbed habitats that people can go and visit, but actually how we create wildlife havens in our gardens, in our communal areas, in areas that are managed by local authorities and managed by institutions such as the NHS. So that will be a really important part, I think, of the action plan, but also I think it will be part of the words. Whether we will actually be able to do that much in the mapping, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, thanks very much. The maps are getting fairly complicated already, just from understanding them. To go down to that level of granularity is probably unhelpful. The further point that Bob asked, which is an interesting one, is any account being taken at the LNRS around the impact of solar farms, particularly in the south of the county?
So I think one of the things we have talked about is the development of local plans and the development of the LNRS. And I think making a firmer connection between both of those is really important. And I think that will probably come at we have representatives from all of the local authorities who will be giving planning permission or have given planning permission for those solar farms. And we know that there's one just kind of off on the Cambridgeshire-Suffolk border that has been given a green light recently. So I think it's not actively on our mapping radar at the moment, as far as I'm aware, but I think we do need to make those links because we don't want to disconnect between the two between sort of plans, local plans and the LNRS.
Quinton, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I can't turn my camera on. Apparently the meeting host has blocked me. Yeah, just to say that the Centre for Landscape Research project at the Cambridge University has done some work on assessing the impact of solar farms on ground nesting birds. Oh, okay, I'm on now. And it's actually quite compelling that solar farms can be developed and designed in a certain way that does actually have quite a beneficial impact on nature, rather than just the things that will fence it, grass it, and put sheep on it. So there is work out there that we're trying to take on board for the consultations on the latest one.
Thank you. That's very helpful, Quentin. Thanks also for your previous input on the history of draining the Fens, which was interesting. It's always good to have it. Always good to have a historian in the audience. I'm
an archaeologist. For people who don't know me, I'm for the natural and historic environment of the county council.
And just nature recovery program that you've also put in the chat as well. Yeah. Thank you. Very good value today, Quentin.
Yeah, thanks. I think we're just winding up now, and so just note in the chat that Rob, thanks very much. He's aimed to answer all the questions directly, but if you've got further questions, left his email down there, so I'm very grateful for that. I should say also thank you. Thank you for you, Pamela, from Ian Dunnett particular. So well done this morning. So thank you for everyone for taking part today. Hope you found it interesting. Great agenda, as I said before, being put together by Peter and with Helen's support. And I hope you all have a very Merry Christmas. Thank you very much indeed, everyone. Time for a mince pie, I think. Thank you.
Thank you for your chairing, Martin.
Well, thank you. But if I can do it next time without having a coughing fit halfway through, it'd be much easier. Thanks very much. Cheers.
And thank you for your beautiful pictures, Pamela.
That's quite all right. That was some of that was John Clare countryside. I decided that I had too much South Cambs in my photos, so I thought I would treat everyone